Hello there. I've had this movie collection of Woody Allen's twice in about the last 10 years. It has 20 films on it. It's on 10 discs with 2 films on each disc. And I just wanted to do a review of it. I've been rewatching all the films over the last, say, 2 weeks, maybe a bit less. So here we go. I'm going to show you a prompt of each disc, because sometimes it can be a bit more interesting to show the actual. So here's one that I watched today, and all I can say is that this is not as good as Manhattan. It was a film that was made directly after Manhattan, and Manhattan is a film that he actually wanted to be. He actually said to the company that he would forfeit his profits to it just as long as they did erase it, but they didn't. And Manhattan is still possibly my favourite Woody Allen film. So I think the reason why he didn't like Manhattan is because his relationship with Diane Keaton was going wrong, and he was just getting into a relationship with Mia Farrow. So that's what he really had a problem with, not the film, just the context of his relationship between those 2 women. Because Manhattan's a great film, but this film is really sort of like a morose. They should really call it Stardust Morose. It's an incredibly morose film, because Manhattan isn't a morose film. Manhattan is a very lively film. This is a sort of like cancerous cousin to it in a way. I'm sorry, but he has no realistic chemistry with Charlotte Rampling, and she's a kind of weird looking woman. She's not beautiful and she's not plain. She's kind of just weird looking, I would say, but not ugly. The film itself pretty much is along those lines. It's a weird film. It's not an ugly film. Most Woody Allen films are shot very nicely. It has a scene of Sharon Stone smiling at him through a train window. He's on a train which is doomed and heading towards, this sort of mass grave of existential certainty, and the other one is about being naive and young and free and being all you want to be. He's supposed to be looking back at his career as a filmmaker in this as the character that he is, and you can tell it's just like a film within a film. At the painting of the painting of the painting, the therapist view of the therapist's view of, it's incredibly stark film, and all I can say about it is there is no light in it. So I'm trying to get about 3 minutes per film going on here, but yeah, I've got just under 30 seconds to finish this review. This is worth watching if you're a Woody Allen fan, but it's not worth watching if you're a fan of his more upbeat films like Manhattan and Annie Hall. I would just say avoid it, because you will not actually believe it's made by the same person. And onto this, Zelig. Zelig is an incredibly unusual film. I think maybe inspired by Spinal Tap, because Spinal Tap was a mockumentary, and that came out, I think, in 1981 or 82. This one came out in 83, and he wanted to make it about a chameleon, a man who could morph himself into anyone who he was around, and it is very charming and possibly his most modest movie, because there is no ego within the film, because it's purely on that pseudo documentary level. it just has all the characteristics of pure fact in a way, storytelling, rather than just him and his neurosis and all the other, intellectually sort of abhorrent individuals that you find in his films. Because yes, they're all clever, but just because someone's clever doesn't make them likable or lovable, which is often the case in his films. So, but Zelig is incredibly likable, lovable, and it's in a sort of ambiguous way, in the same way that the character just somehow morphs. Your acceptance of the character does the very same thing throughout the film, and it's his most unusual film. I think really it's his way of saying, the actor, director, writer has to morph himself to every character, situation, emotion, within not just his life but everyone else who he comes into contact with, and it basically leaves him wondering who he truly is, because that's what you are as a writer, director, actor. You're kind of a chameleon, just having to be the camouflage of each person, or all the people, combined that you're involved with. So it's a very complex yet very simply put film. So this is possibly his best film of the 80s, along with Radio Days, but yet to get to that. Right. Now, we are on to Radio Days here. I just finished watching this, and, well, I think you can safely say that this is possibly one of the films that definitely is his most loved film of the 80s, but possibly his most loved film of all, because it's such an affectionate take, a nostalgic rendering of the 1930s and 40s mainly, and all the radio programs which were really just sort of constant, like, to not just entertain people but to control people, because radio controls people, and control people before the days of the internet and TV. It was that very thing. Maybe seemingly more innocent, but yeah, radio is every bit as much a propaganda tool as a television is, or any other modern equivalent device. But that aside, yeah, you get to see him as a child, as he's portraying himself through different actors, and his family through likewise appropriated individuals, and there's a lot of the music of that time, obviously, for radio, and it shows you a lot of the people that were involved, which kind of still have that sort of Woody Allen feel to them, because he is the vessel which they came through, so he very much is the best judge of it. I think everyone loved radio at that time. He particularly loved it. His family loved radio, and his favourite shows and their favourite shows. And radio was more of a benign creature back then, but it was still no less controlling, and in that sense, overwhelming, especially with like broadcasts like Orson Welles, and which you can laugh at, but people will believe anything that they're being told, and it's even worse in this day and age. So yeah, a great film, and sometimes it can be a bit too OTT, but so what. Right, September. Now September I didn't get very far into. I've never actually completed this film, so how, pray tell, can I make a comprehensive analysis of it? Well, I can, because there's many people who've started films and then only got half an hour in. The problem with this type of film, and its interiors suffers from the same thing, and I would really say it's a sort of twin. Like, Interiors was made in the late 70s and this was made in the late 80s, is that it's too suffocating, it's too emotionally claustrophobic. Like, this woman is supposed to have had a nervous breakdown, played by Mia Farrow, who's in all of his films in the 80s, like Diane Keaton was in all of his films in the 70s. And then she goes and recuperates with her parents, but her mother is incredibly overbearing individual. I don't like films with very overbearing people, whether it's a man or a woman, and they make me want to just turn the film off, because everything's just about what they think and what they feel, and it's more important than what anyone else is going through. Their sort of mad dictator control freakery is just primary at all times, and I remember this, and this is how I thought about this, and what I feel about that. If you do this, and they irritate you. Like that Harry Enfield character going, only me? You don't want to do that. It's like, but not for comic effect. Just it doesn't have any release from it. There's no relief from it. So I didn't get very far into this film. I'm trying to do about 3 minutes per film here, so I'm going to try and stick to my 3 minutes per film. What I will say about this film is, it's always well cast, as you can tell just looking at the front of it, but I don't like these type of Woody Allen films. Some people think they're great, like more of his sort of like Fellini-esque, Bergman-esque, movies that take their cue from, La Strada and all these other films that you not often, but you'll have heard him quote, and you'll have heard him mention their names, but I don't think he's meant to be making films like that, just like, say, someone like Jim Carrey isn't meant to be making, like, particularly serious films on the whole. So, just to bring this to this is really for, really die-hard Woody fans, and he's not even in the film, so that's not good enough for me. Okay, alright. Next up, Shadows and Fog. Now this is a great film. And really, I think this film is completely indebted to Jack the Ripper, because it's just basically the same thing, like the shadows and the fog of this place, and the serial killer that's on the loose, who's killing, mainly women, women of the night, prostitutes, and it's too sort of coincidental, isn't it? I think it possibly was reading about Jack the Ripper at the time, and this has come out of it. It's a very European feeling film. John Malkovich, gives it that air of art house European sophistication. It doesn't work, and I'll tell you why it doesn't work, because for one, Woody Allen's character is a bit too much of a wimp in this film, and I don't like when he plays a full-blown sort of wimp in his movies. He's not a wimp, here's a man who writes, directs, and acts. He's a strong man, physically and mentally, but the Jack the Ripper, vein that flows through it, and then the obsession with prostitutes in it, kind of irritates me. You got John Cusack in one scene going on about how, wonderful it was to be with Mia Farrow, and he'd paid $700 to be with her. You think to yourself, what man would pay $700? And this is supposed to have been set at the turn of like, the 20th century, so $700 then would have been worth about 10 times what it is now. You're just thinking, this man's crazy. Like, that is actually crazy. Who the hell would spend that amount of money? Like, I'm not being funny, but Mia Farrow was not that good looking. Diane Keaton wasn't that good looking. But, he was very taken with them because they were more intellectual. And he'd always craved people who were sort of like his intellectual superiors. You can go with as many prostitutes as you want, especially when you've got a lot of money, but to find someone who you're truly compatible with on an intellectual level, for a man as, burgeoning as Woody Allen, is very hard. All I would say is this film is very atmospheric, though. And if you like sort of horror, it's his closest thing to a horror film that you'll ever find. And on that level, yeah, it's worth watching, but the prostitute aspect of it is really dull and gets boring extremely quickly. Now, Sleeper is a film, probably one of the first Woody Allen films I ever bought. Not watched, but bought. I bought a copy of this on VHS a long time ago, and I didn't mind it. It was okay. One of those like 4 for like 20 quid jobs from Virgin Megastores or whatever. He basically woke up in the future. It's definitely an homage to Charlie Chaplin's way of putting across humour. And one thing I will give Woody Allen, not just being very good at writing for men and women, but he's a brilliant physical comedian. Incredibly funny. Just as funny as the Marx Brothers, just as funny as Chaplin himself. In fact, Chaplin would have been very taken by Woody Allen. He would have thought that he was every bit as talented as he was. He probably would have been jealous of him. Better writer than him, every bit as funny as him physically, if not funnier. Funnier voice as well. Like, not just a man who can write comedy, but can perform comedy, and he's multi-talented, like, in terms of comedy. But he's also a very good straight actor as well. And this is a massive homage to silent comedy, but yeah, definitely Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, and I'd like to say more actors that I know from that time, but I don't really know them that well. I wouldn't say Laurel and Hardy though. But yeah, he's almost like cryogenically thawed out in that time, and he finally comes to his senses, and then he ends up playing this figure on the front who were sort of automatons because they want to eradicate him. So, and then realize that he's malfunctioning because he's got human qualities, and they want to eradicate him as well as a seeming robot. And then he escapes with Diane Keaton, and it's happened a lot in their early films, and it just ends up the two of them, which I think he's always most comfortable with because he was in a relationship with her, and a man and his woman always going to be the most satisfying thing for him, whether it's fiction or reality. So it's very wacky, and like all of his early 70s efforts, very watchable, like Bananas and Play It Again Sam, and yeah, it's still a fairly good film to this day. So, next 3-minute review shall concern Alice, and this is probably the best film that he made for Mia Farrow on one level, apart from Broadway Danny Rose, which possibly is his best film as well. But I kind of like this film, and I kind of don't like it at the same time. A lot of people have a lot of you have like a crisis of whether you truly care for what he's projecting at you at times. She is a typical upper class New Yorker. She spends her days having manicures and spa treatments and shopping in incredibly expensive boutiques, and she sees this man one day, Joel Manting, and he just appeals to her, like, and then she goes to a Chinese herbalist, and he basically gives her the power of invisibility, that she can spy on her. She's pretty sure he's cheating on her husband, and then she gets into a more sort of like supernatural relationship through these Chinese herbs with Joel Mantegna. I don't know how the fuck you pronounce his name, by the way, but it is quite a charming film, and it's another film that I couldn't get all the way through. I've seen it all the way through before, but what stops me with certain Woody Allen films is they kind of irritate me after a while with their overemphasis on the beauty of men and women in certain relationships, because there isn't any real beauty. You can feel a certain way about anything. It doesn't have to be about a man or woman. You can feel that way about a pair of socks, you know what I mean? It's his view, and it comes through with all his characters, and that's one of the only things that I fault him on. As good as he is at sort of like morphing, you know, into other people and their mindsets to write all different characters, his obsession with sex and how that equates to this sublime, you know, experience of life is just ridiculous. So I find it ridiculous now, and I still find it ridiculous. And this is a film that's a flick-through bite as well. It all seems to be just in her brain, like, and she didn't stay with him much longer after this film, so it was sort of death knell in a way. Next movie review, and even Woody Allen fans who have probably know about this film, you know, the ones who aren't proper fans, like, this is his most famous film. It was the Oscar winner for him, and I'd say rightly so, because even though I probably prefer Love and Death, which was made a year before it, this is more of a mature relationship movie. And it's definitely about their relationship, you know. It's art taking its cue from life, life taking its cue from art, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and Annie is a very likable, again, you know, upper middle class New Yorker, and he's a more of a lower middle class New Yorker, but then again, the fact that he writes means that he is more, you know, on her level, if not above her level financially, like it is often the case with his characters. They just sort of enjoy each other's idiosyncrasies, which I think is the key to all relationships. And all the women that he's with, like before her and in between, like times when they're not together, are very quirky individuals, but no one of them are as quirky as he is. He's always quirkier than any of them. He's quirkier than she is, and only one who's possibly more eccentric than him is her brother in that film, played by Christopher Walken. In itself is worth watching. And a great cameo by Jeff Goldblum, and that very famous mantra one-liner. But it's a very cozy relationship movie. It's a very funny film. It's also very, you know, serious on, you know, the resonant note that comes away from it. There's an echo to every shout, I suppose. And this is his sort of, you know, it's his apex in his career of relationship movies. He's made more complex movies than this, but this is the one that gets a perfect proportion of comedy and, you know, tragic prescience, and yeah, it's probably like the time when they were most fitting for each other. you know, and it's hard to review, like, when you've only got 3 minutes, probably, but this is the only way that I can mathematically get all of these films in, so, you do kind of, you sort of, I don't know, you root for her more than him, in a way. She's far more sympathetic, she's far more empathetic. He is quite an arrogant character in this film, but you root for them both because you get a feeling like every arrogant person needs a modest person, and vice versa, and the genius needs the ordinary to just truly be normal. So that's what makes this film so profound, I suppose. Right, now, next up is Another Woman. And I was watching so much of this film, and it's another film that I've never got all the way through, and it's got one hell of a cast, including Gene Hackman, Gina Rowlands, and Ian Holm. She is I think she's a writer, but she starts hearing, like, through a wall, like the dialogue between, I'm pretty sure it's this actress's, she's a therapist, so she starts taking more of an interest, like eavesdropping on what's going on through that wall, which she can't help but hear. And, you know, all the sort of, like, the tangled webs of deceit and duplicity, and that occur as a result of these things in real life, as well as, you know, when people involuntarily become involved with them just by overhearing, you know, this sort of gossips, like Wonderland, so to speak, like which therapists are sort of privy to, and they don't necessarily gossip, but I'm pretty sure they talk to their loved ones about certain aspects of certain people, and then hope that in itself remains confidential, but that Another Woman, as always in Woody Allen films, it's always, I say always, I hate using the word always, but there is a triangle often going on, 2 women and 1 man, or 2 men and 1 woman, and the threesomes abound in this, as they are with most of his movies, and I can't really make a full review of this film. It's like, I can't really remember much about it. Like, I've seen it before, and all I could say is, like, I could possibly do with going back and watching it again. This is a very bad review of a film. But, yeah, it's not really a funny film, and it probably has more in common with September on that level, but it's not as morose, and it's not as claustrophobic, thankfully. Because who the hell likes claustrophobic movies, you know? So, yeah, that was yet another bad review, I would say. Now, Bananas is a film I can definitely review quite well, because I've seen it many times, and, you know, it's quite an easy film to sum up on one level. He plays a sort of, he tests different exercise equipment for this sort of bizarre, like, eccentric, you know, hybrids of, like, office equipment and exercise installations, and it shows you some very funny early scenes of him trying to buy pornography and getting mugged on the subway, and then he gets involved with his actual wife. The actress who plays her is his actual wife at the time, and she thinks he's charmingly affecting, but not necessarily worth being with, and she wants to break up with him, but she can't quite bring herself to like specify 100% why, and he drills her on each aspect of it, and then in itself is very funny. And then he ends up, he was going to go with her to San Marco, and then he decides to go over to San Marco anyway to see what he would have experienced if he'd been with her. And he becomes part of the Fidel Castro, sort of communist guerrilla sort of front, and he becomes El Presidente, and it's incredibly bizarre and surreal and funny, and one of his most wacky films. And just if you could just look at the of him trying to stab an oversized banana, which almost nods to the oversized fruit in Sleepers, but in Sleeper, you could just tell it's a wacky film. The last scene of it is him and his wife again, like they get back together right at the end. The character, and he's commentating on their coition as though it's a boxing match, and it's very funny, and it just leaves you in no doubt that this film is very immature and very very knowledgeable at the same time. It can be very immature and very knowledgeable. And that's how I always see Woody Allen, as very immature and knowledgeable at the same time. And you can really use that, paradox as a duality, as a way of making yourself incredibly rich and famous. So there you go. So next up, interiors. Now, of all these films, I would probably say this is one of the most given away to illusions of Bergman, Ingmar Bergman, who made The Seventh Seal. And it's a good film, but it's very indulgent, and it kind of irritates you, like how. Well, then again, maybe I'm thinking of another one of his films. Sometimes he can really blur so much because they've got such similar characterization and themes, and But basically, they're all having sort of like crises in their own way. Most of his characters in most of his films are having crises, but they can play it out in like a jocular way or a particularly serious way. And in this, it's definitely more of the Bergman-esque, starkness going on, but essentially it's a good film. And it's unusual to see Diane Keaton just doing a straight role, even though away from his films, she often made purely straight movies. She was a very flexible actress, and it's hard to really sum this film up. It's just, there's a lot of female camaraderie in it, let's just say. It's good. It's definitely a feminist take on, existential, motifs within filmmaking and life itself. You do get the feeling that Woody Allen is one part radical feminist and one part like the ultimate sort of sex mad Neanderthal, and that's probably why he's such an interesting character, because he's such a sort of like contradiction at all times. But that's why I think he takes himself out of the film at times, because he overwhelms the film. It's just him that you're focusing on, and to make it a more profound neutral landscape, he has to remove himself and just focus on the other characters, and he does it very well in this film indeed. But personally, I don't like this film, and I wouldn't rewatch it, but for big fans of, say, Diane Keaton, let's just say, not so much Woody Allen, this one will definitely blow your socks off. So there you go. Next up, to keep them with the 3 minutes, review here. Love and Death, which is a brilliant film, and just like Annie Hall, it's just peppered with fantastic, funny, observations, and just it just shows you the pointlessness of the warlike mentality of men, and the pointlessness of relationships in a way, because they kind of both, reduce us to the level of unfeeling and unsympathetic, strangers, and that's obviously a bad thing. But dealing with him and his conscientious objection to being conscripted into the Russian army in itself is just an absolutely hilarious, thought, and being trained with the obvious, jokes which kind of make me think a lot of his first film, Take the Money and Run, his attempts to escape from prison and being in prison, but being in the army. Army is another type of prison, and his scenes with Diane Keaton are absolutely fabulous, as they always are, whether it is Play It Again Sam or Annie Hall. They're just made for each other, and literally in life and in art, but there are some superb scenes in it, really. The way it opens up with the clouds and speeded up shot of clouds moving, and the voiceover, and the characters themselves are just ludicrous but brilliantly just amplified, and that's what he is superb at. Some of the funniest, one-liners of all of his movies, this, and possibly the best title as well. So yeah, this is one of my absolute faves, and that scene is pretty much the very final scene of the film. That's taken from the front, but I won't tell you anything else about it. Spoilers alert. You can't spoil anything. You can only talk about it. To spoil it is to literally ruin something and set fire to it, whatever. But yeah, this is possibly his best movie. Now, onward. A Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy. Now, I don't like this film, and I'll just say it straight away. It is William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream with sex thrown in, and it kind of works on one level, seeing them in this beautiful, idyllic rural setting, woodlands, and the typical affairs that are going on, and him with a sort of Leonardo da Vinci-esque inventor sort of portrayal, which so he's not just hamming Shakespeare, he's hamming Leonardo da Vinci, and then his other friend, I think he's a therapist or a professor, and it doesn't work. It almost works. It's like certain of his films almost work, and I just can't put my finger on it. But the setting of it, in, like I say, the countryside is beautiful. Whereabouts this was actually filmed. But the characters are they're just sex mad. And I know it's supposed to be a sex comedy, and it's a pun on William Shakespeare's fabulous play, but it's not a fabulous film. And I bet there's a lot of people who think this is a great film. Maybe that just goes to prove that I'm quite a fickle Woody Allen fan. I only really like it when it's one of the two. Either it's very straight or it's very comedic, and this kind of tries to just blend it together like it's some sort of comedy drama smoothie, and I don't like it. it just doesn't do anything for me. So I don't know whether I should linger on this for another minute, but I will do. I'm trying to give them all, like, the just with, oh, wait a minute, actually. Anyway, The Purple Rose of Cairo. I can't think of anything else to say about that film. It irritates me. This is possibly one of his most well-known films. It's probably on TV more than any other film. It's a very conventional setup. The woman who goes to see the old film star who then comes out the screen and goes into her life, and then how that affects everyone around her. And it's a very charming film. It has a lot in common with Radio Days on that level, bringing the past directly into the present, and vice versa. And best thing about this film is Danny Aiello is a fantastic actor, and really it's his film. It's not Jeff Daniels' film. Jeff Daniels plays the man who comes out the screen, the old actor she pointlessly romanticizes to the point that she brings him back through the screen into her life. But Jeff Daniels is a great actor, and it is nice to see films where there's more of a sort of old school feel to them. I think a lot of Woody Allen's films are homages, and then they're also just a way of trying to recreate what he saw on screen himself when he was much younger and giving it that overall feel. This is no less the case. But overall, I think unless you're into this type of movie, sort of, it's too sort of sentimental on one level, and it kind of irritates me. But it's also very watchable, and she's not satisfied with her relationship with Danny Aiello, and it's a bit of a woman abuser, and he's the complete opposite of that character, not just on screen, but when he comes into her life for real. And it's very cathartic on that level, and it's also, totally in the realms of Cloud Cuckoo Land, but that's Woody Allen's films for you. And yeah, but it's still one worth watching, I would say. Okay, next up, everything you always wanted to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask now. That's got to be the best Woody Allen title film of them all. There are about 6 mini stories in this. How sperm come out of a man's body, played by all different characters, governed by, the administrative powers of Burt Reynolds and company, and how he plays an Italian, a false Italian whose partner is obsessed with having sex in public. Then there's a man who's obsessed with wearing women's clothing, and then ends up getting found out when he's forced out of his house with the clothing on. Another one which is very funny, about sort of like a Dr. Frankenstein-esque one. This guy who invites him and this young woman to his sort of, his lair, and he's just doing pointless experiments on all different, including trying to find out whether, a woman can make a certain sound if she's gangbanged by a bunch of Boy Scouts, and it's just like brilliantly funny. The Jester one with the Queen, when he ends up with his hand in iron knickers, is possibly the best one in my opinion. And then the Gene Wilder one with the sheep, falling in love with a sheep, of a man who's obviously crazy, but he's come to a physician to admit his madness. And just sublime film. 72 minutes of just perfect comedy and drama, And this is what Woody Allen was really known for in the 70s when he was, a young man. It's what most Woody Allen fans really want to see. Don't really want to see films like September and Another Woman and Interiors. They're too heavy. These are obviously the lighter stuff that's got more of a helium and giddy feel to them. And this is definitely a very giddy feeling, brilliantly executed and funny film. And if you can't like this film, you can't like Woody Allen. Let's just put it that way. Along with things like his first film, Take the Money and Run. Next up, Hannah and Her Sisters. Now this film has been on TV a billion times. It's another Oscar winner. It was his Annie Hall. Hannah Hall? Annie Hall? Maybe a little bit of a thingy going on there. But Michael Caine was in this film, and any film that's got Michael Caine in tends to do quite well, as with Max von Sydow, who was in The Exorcist, which is a terrible film, but based on a great book. And again, it's another triangle of sisters who have all these different affairs, and Michael Caine is going out with Hannah herself. The one who played Hannah must have only been in her 20s in this, and Michael Caine would have been 20 years older than us. So you're dealing again with a man who's obsessed with women much younger than him, and then he's obsessed with having men portray himself. Michael Caine really represents Woody Allen in this film, and it's a typical upper, really, it's almost like upper class New York. Really, they're all professors and book writers and doctors and whatnot, and it's a very elitist world. It shows them in bookshops, and you're not dealing with low class people on that level going to operas and whatnot. And one of the tragic things with this film is the Diane West character, West. She is a cocaine addict, and he sort of comes back to that at the end when she I remember you, and she went on a date with him and she was on cocaine, and basically you can't have a relationship with a woman or anyone who's got a substance, dependence to that degree that malforms their brain and their focus in life. So this is a very good film, and it's one of those films that you'll end up watching and you'll miss quite a few bits of it. There's a piece of music by Bach which Max von Sydow plays in one scene, which is particularly apt and very, grandiose, and a lot of the themes in this, and that scene where he's trying to find out whether he's got a brain tumor or not, it's very, very grandiose, and yeah, it's definitely his Annie Hall of the 80s, but it's not as good as Annie Hall, but it's still very much worth watching. So just play away the last few seconds of this review, and then we can get to Broadway Danny Rose, which possibly is his best film. I would contend this and Manhattan are his best films. Why would I contend that this is possibly his best film? I don't know, something about it, just a bunch of people just reminiscing in a cafe about he's a theatrical manager and he has the worst acts ever, blind ventriloquist and xylophone players and with big breasts who plays glasses, and a parrot that and it's just all for laughs, isn't it? You can tell, but it's beautifully rendered in the drama sections, and his relationship with Mia Farrow in this film in particular is absolutely just perfect. They almost seem as though they're one and the same person. Sometimes the man and the woman can just be fused together, and in this film they're almost like one thing. There's no difference between them, She is just a complete basket case, like neurotic and just jumping in cars and just going from here to there, and then she's in love and having an affair with this really washed up, very, very mediocre singer who is out of shape and drinks massive amounts, and it basically looks like he'd be in the mafia if it weren't for the fact that he was on a stage, or he'd be in a nearby cemetery because he's just so out of shape. But they're all very likable characters, and Danny himself is extremely likable. He's got such enthusiastic, fervor for everyone around him. He doesn't really have a bad word for anyone. He can sum up like saying his thing. He should look more like something out of a Reptile House, like one of his aunts. But ultimately, he's a very sympathetic character, and he'll always give someone a chance and try and make a book out of them at the same time. There's some great chase scenes, and just overall just fantastic hybridization of tragic and comic elements. I don't think he gets any better in any of his films. It's just the absolute apex of his acting career, and as it was with Mia Farrow. And this is just a fabulous film, and you've got to watch it. And this is the ultimate sort of Woody Allen film, apart from Manhattan. Which brings me on to Crimes and Misdemeanors. And Crimes and Misdemeanors, I used to have a VHS copy of this many years ago, along with Sleeper. And I didn't really watch it properly because I don't like films that are about affairs. And Martin Landau's character is having an affair with Angelica Houston, and she's much younger than him. She was born in 1950. He was born in 1927, so there's a 23-year age gap there. So he was in his early 60s in this film, and she was only 39. So there's a big age gap, same age gap between most fathers and daughters there. The Crimes and Misdemeanors, though, if you can get past the basicness of the usual affair scenario in most Woody Allen films, is the crisis of conscience of this woman is so obsessed with him that she's willing to go to his family and tell him everything, and then his brother, who is basically a very seedy gangster type, then offers to kill her, and then he thinks that's the only way that nothing will come out about it. And then as he gets closer to the thing, his conscience kicks into overdrive, and then he can't bring himself to go through with it. And then Woody Allen's character, he's having a crisis of conscience with seeing another woman and not being faithful to his wife, and those having a sort of parallel to each other. And it's one of those films, it's taken me quite a few times to just actually get through it completely from first buying it, and it was only a few days ago where I watched it all the way through, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a very powerful film, and it's not a film like September or Interiors or Another Woman. It's got more than those films. It's really got more of a sort of I don't know how to describe it, but it has the power of his best films like Broadway Danny Rose, but it's obviously more serious. So it doesn't have the comedy of those films, but it really it just encapsulates the importance of morality and conscience, and it's not worth killing someone, because they're going to tell another person about something that you've been up to as a couple at a certain time. So human life is worth way more than the trivialities that we reduce it to at times, and that is what this film is about. So we're now on for Manhattan, and I think this is his best film, along with Broadway Danny Rose. Why is this his best film? Well, just the cover there. It encapsulates everything that Alan sort of was in awe of and what made him want to make films, which was Manhattan itself. And so it was always going to be one of his most profound films. It comes at the right time. It comes like 10 or 11 years after his first film, so I think by that point he'd basically discovered the perfect way to balance serious and comedic, needs within movies and perspectives. And his relationship with Mariel Hemingway in this is really, really very nicely done, because you could say, like, in this day and age, it wouldn't be able to be portrayed. Showing a 17-year-old with, a man who's well into his 40s is pretty much like akin to like pedophilia, which it most definitely isn't. But she's more mature than he is. He's more immature than her. They're both very highly libidinous, and then he ends up going out with, again, as he was in real life, Diane Keaton's character, and she's older than Mariel Hemingway, but still quite a bit younger than him, and she's having an affair with his friend, and then they start fighting over her, and she starts fighting over her sanity and who she's truly meant to be loyal to, and then he realizes that he's dismissed Mariel Hemingway because she's so young, and then right at the end they seemingly get back together again, but it's all convenience a lot of the time, just affairs, who you can be with or not be with, whether you can get to phone this person or that person. If they're not available, then they're available, and it's not a good situation for anyone, is it? But it's brilliantly rendered, and it just has his classic, humor and intellect, and the scenes of Manhattan are just absolutely fabulous. And he hated this film and wanted it to be erased, and it's unbelievable because it's such a fabulous film, and the first film where he ever showed Mia Farrow. The orgasm line is an absolute classic one. But anyway, last 3 minutes and last review. Mathematical, this one. Melinda and Melinda. Now, this is one of his 2000s films, and it's the only one on this 20 film collection that gets past 1992. And this one was from 2004. And the Melinda in question, I believe there are two Melindas here. I don't know whether they are twins or not, but one of them is... And I can't really review this film very well, because even though I've seen it a few times, I've never watched it all the way through. But as you'd expect with having Will Ferrell, and it has Johnny Lee Miller in it as well. It's very well cast, like all of his 2000s films. But as with a lot of his 2000s films, and they're not particularly well done. Like the last 2000s film I liked of his was The Curse of the Jade Scorpion, which had more of a feel of one of his older films. I felt like after that he kind of the films just kind of went away because he wasn't starring in them. They didn't really have as much of a Woody Allen feel to them. For it to be a Woody Allen film, he has to actually be in it, whether he's written it or not. And he just gets people to, he gets Will Ferrell to be him, or he gets, Owen Wilson to be him in Midnight in Paris, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Made for TV movies, one actor portraying the life of another actor. It doesn't work. Kurt Russell as Elvis, etc. But again, I got to a scene where she was talking about possibly wanting her husband killed, and it was probably about 45 minutes in. It's probably a 90-minute film, and I just couldn't get past that scene because it was irritating me. How OTT. But then he's right, they are very OTT. They think what they're going through emotionally is the most profound and most, demanding and important thing in all existence, and that is what he really gets across. It's not that he finds them important as like the upper class, neuroticism and everything. He doesn't find it entertaining and fascinating. He just finds it disturbing. But he knows that it makes for great entertainment. And he's very good at just writing about it and portraying it on screen. So there you go. That's like the 20th film, and that took me 61 minutes or something. And I just hope that gives you a good overview of his career.